Welcome to the Smarter Leadership Podcast, where we explore the power of leadership, from overcoming challenges to shaping cultures and building a lasting legacy. Through inspiring stories and insights from our guests, we'll share transformative lessons to help you thrive in today's interconnected world. I'm Tucci. Join us for conversations that will inspire thought and action. Ambassador Kwabena Osei-Danquah is Ambassador at Large of Ghana and Special Advisor to Ghana's Minister for Foreign Affairs. He has also been a key figure in international negotiations. He has acted as Special Envoy to the President of Ghana and led the operational support team for the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. He previously served as Chef de Cabinet to the President of the 73rd Session of the UN General Assembly and as Director of Governance and Multilateral Affairs at UNFPA. With a career marked by leadership in global initiatives, Ambassador Osei-Danquah is also a published poet and author of Breaking Down Diplomacy, an insider's guide to the art of negotiation. Ambassador Kwabena Osei-Danquah, was there ever a point where you decided this is the career for me? Was there an event, was there a moment when you knew I want to go into diplomacy?
It's very interesting. It started by accident. I was doing my national service at the office of the president a long time ago. And a group of foreign service officers were going on a course in Bulgaria. And I was asked to go along. It was very strange because nobody understood why I was selected to join them. And I really enjoyed not the program as such, but being together with the foreign service officers. And most of them were much senior. And I just I thought this could be a fascinating line of work, but I didn't really even think of doing it.
Can I just take you back for a moment? So you mentioned you were at the office of the president. Which president was that? And let's maybe approximately how old were you so that we can put it into context?
Yes, okay. So this was my national service. So I probably was 24. And my interest actually in working in the castle was, I thought the whole experiment, if you want to call it that way, a military guy takes over power and then
so we're talking about President Rawlings.
We're talking of Rawlings. And then installs a civilian government. And they didn't seem to have a clear idea about economics and so on and so forth. And I thought it would be good to write a book about this experiment. So that was my motivation,
Wonderful. And how has that maybe either changed the trajectory of your life or reinforced where you would see yourself maybe 30 years later?
Well, actually, even whilst doing my service, I had the opportunity, I decided to comment on policy and things happening in the country. Right. So I wrote articles which were then cleared in the Castle Information Bureau. And I think that the chair of the PNDC used to read the articles before they were cleared or after they were cleared, I don't know, before they were published. Because one day he asked for me. And then after our discussion, of course, he disagreed with the things I wrote. And then I started writing speeches for the First Lady and himself, and then some other members of the PNDC, I guess, heard about me and they wanted me to write. So I wasn't a speechwriter, but I had started writing the speeches and I realized that I actually loved public policy and analyzing public policy and so on. And I think that became part of the foundation for me when I I moved to join the Foreign Service.
That's wonderful. So you can almost say it's almost as if you were destined for it, in a sense.
Yeah, it was. You could say that, because I didn't apply for any job. I mean, apart from asking if I could do my national service, I generally haven't applied for any job since then. Everything has been because somebody decides that, I could do some job, and then I've done it.
So would you say today that this has been, and this is your purpose, everything surrounding what you've been doing, or do you feel that there is something else out there that you believe maybe that's purpose as well, but is there something else that drives you today?
I have always believed in the obligation to contribute to society, even as a young person, I was interested in how you eradicate poverty, how you ensure equality, and so on and so forth. And every career I've had is been central to how I do my work. It's like, what's your motivation? And even when I felt that, whatever we do, it's not likely that we would ever have the perfect society. I just feel that everybody has to play their part, and then you exit, and society continues. It's like you're condemned to do the right thing. You should, if you want to be happy. Absolutely.
I can tell you I've met several people who know you, who have spoken about you very highly, and shared how much you've impacted them in terms of your readiness to share, to teach. Not that you're doing it like in a classroom, but people say that, in this world of diplomacy, you've really helped them and kind of held their hands. I don't know if you know that, but that is a wonderful thing, Definitely you would have faced a number of tough situations over the years. When I look at even the title of your book, which I'd like to spend a few minutes on in a while, An Insider's Guide to Negotiation, Breaking Down Diplomacy. Negotiation is something that is necessary in different walks of life, but you're not going to be in a world of negotiation without having some battles. Maybe could you share one of the toughest that you've had to face, or two?
Yes. Okay. Let me start with something called the Montevideo Consensus.
Which you talk about in the book as well, yeah.
Yes, which I talk about in the book. In 2011, the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a resolution calling for the review of the outcomes or the implementation of the outcomes of one of the most important conferences it had ever held on population and development. And for the first time, they talked about population not in terms of numbers, but in terms of individual rights and well-being. So the link between economic growth and sustainable development, protecting the environment, the fact that we needed to save women who were delivering from death. And, Africa had huge numbers of maternal mortality, unsafe abortions, and how much mortality it created in poorer countries or regions like Africa and so on. So this is very interesting, the way we teach young people about their rights to protect their bodies and so on and so forth, save them from diseases like, STIs and HIV and so on. And you know that many of the issues were contentious. Right. Even women's rights, many countries were not comfortable. So 20 years later, we were going to review it. And I was appointed the executive coordinator of the review. So The operating principle that I had was twofold: to have a rigorous process so that the results could not be challenged, given the political environment in most parts of the world to those issues. And secondly, we wanted to make sure that it was not a government-driven exercise, because then people would question the data and information which is being given by government ministries and departments. So we encouraged each country to have a multi-stakeholder exercise so that civil society and everybody would be part, so that whatever data came out of a country would be seen to be, the most accurate. And then we moved to the regional level. And each region was to organize a review meeting, conference, under their UN regional economic commissions. So the one in Latin America and the Caribbean, under their regional commission, is called ECLAC, was the most, on paper, the most challenging, because the Latin American region for a long time has been dominated by Opus Dei, the Catholic order. And this had affected the way they looked at certain issues, especially in terms of abortions, access to abortions, and so on and so forth. So I went to Montevideo to meet with the minister in charge of the conference. And I remember him very well, Dr. Brioso, because it turned out that we shared some things in common. He loved coming to West Africa to study the drums in Benin and elsewhere, because Uruguay has an African population. So, I went to meet with him, and he had the officials from the Regional Economic Commission there, and they had planned a very, if you like, narrow process of review. They didn't want any contention, no controversies. So I had to convince Dr. Brioso, because he was going to chair the conference, and I had to convince him that what the Regional Economic Commission was doing was not responsive to the resolution of the General Assembly. And those people were in the meeting, so I had to be very astute in not alienating them, but then see that, look, this thing will not fly. And, there was a lot of opposition from the UN civil servants, and I kept making my case. And then he said, well, but it's too late. The conference starts in 2 days. The member states need to have the documentation before they even leave their countries. And, and I said, I'm sorry, but we hadn't seen the documents they had prepared. But eventually, and I said, look, we can help you, redraft the document, because you need to look at a certain number of issues, and I explained why. And eventually, they agreed. We met with my colleagues, and we sat down and worked through the day and the next night and so on. And we had a great document. And the outcome of that conference was the most historic. Mm-hmm. No global conference dealing with human rights had been so progressive. Yeah. So the Montevideo Consensus, in a way, was a reflection of the capacity to engage with, different parties to an issue and get them to the point where you wish them to be without offending them or being disagreeable. And I recall that I had a meeting with the Jamaican Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs at the time, and he mentioned some concerns, and I explained them to him, and I even showed him the language in the program of action, and I said, that's not what it says, you know. I believe it was about sexuality education, you know, and I think the idea that young people could be told about their sexuality was very troubling.
It didn't sit well.
It didn't sit well. So, but then I explained the consequences of people not knowing about their sexuality, and even the whole idea of young people, or young males treating young females as if they had some right over them and so on and so forth. So it was a totally new but necessary way of looking at these issues. You know.
Shifting the mindset.
And I convinced him. So we had it was the best outcome in all the 5 regions of the UN, you know. So,
and what role would you, because, you know, you touched on culture, the different countries, and, you know, the views are different from one culture to another. So how much of your efforts were stemming from understanding those cultural nuances, and how much from, let's say, general negotiation, global tactics or skills? You know, if you can give us some insights into how that plays.
So the interesting thing is that the way I look at issues and different societies and cultures, I am convinced that there is no issue that you cannot solve through diplomacy, right? So the first thing is you really need to understand the other side's perspectives and show respect for their views. So I start off by speaking in their language, because they feel that a certain way of looking at issues could lead to consequences that are not acceptable. And I can see that's a legitimate concern, but is it true? And so if I'm in Addis Ababa and in the African meeting, and I was at the African meeting, I was actually even attacked by some ministers publicly, but who said we're doing the bidding of Western countries, you know, but it had nothing to do with that. But the idea is that if you tell me that when you teach young people about their sexuality, they will actually be less promiscuous. And I'm giving you data from the Netherlands, Norway, and so on, places where they not only teach comprehensive sexuality education, but they actually provide services to young people. So the young people know the consequences of having premarital sex or whatever without understanding the consequences. And they have less, well, in fact, some of them have negligible rates of death from abortions, unsafe abortions, or abortion levels are so low. And these are the countries that you're saying that their approach is wrong. And then you take Africa. And Africa's data on all these issues, deaths from unsafe abortions, HIV in young people, and so on, is even higher than poorer countries in Asia. So you got to ask where you're getting it wrong, because the churches have been preaching about it for God knows how long, and the situation keeps getting worse. And in fact, that's the situation in Ghana today. But so the idea, I'm not going to get into an argument with somebody who is so important to a solution,
right?
But I have to find a way to
convince
him to whatever. So I say, well, so the problem is that, look, if you look at the data, in this place, they're not, the girls don't even get pregnant whilst they're in school. It's not that they're not having sex, but they know something that they have to do to protect themselves. So, well, is it in your interest that your people are contracting HIV and dying? And you are saying that the young people are the future of your country. And look at the data. It's scary. So, is it possible that you can ensure that your policies take into account these issues as you implement your policy? So you can have language that says that each country has the right to make its own policies, and you can put that in the language, you know, and then it says that taking into account, and then you go. So it means that you can be flexible, but the key conclusions you can't ignore them.
Sure.
And that brings me to the second most difficult challenge I had, which was about the cost.
So just before you move to that, so I speak their language, think or speak the way they do, relate to them, present the facts in a respectful way, and understand that they are actually part of the solution. So
and coming then
find language to that, bring them,
They eventually feel, okay. And this is not restricted to some continents. In Europe, you had the highest opposition to the human rights of individuals from certain countries, right? So, and I knew that Russia, for instance, was not comfortable about many of the issues on individual rights of people and especially in the areas of sexuality and so on. And so I actually pushed to have the Russian minister chair the conference. And, so instead of Russia being the opposition, because they were chairing, because if you're a chair, you have to be a bit fair, you have to listen to everybody. And Russia was actually able to swing it because the countries like Belarus and others that were following Russia came on board. And so, it's you have to look at both the mechanics and then the human emotions. I call it the psychology of the moment. But my second difficult issue, which I have written about, but not in the book, was about opposition to a chapter of the reports that we prepared for the Secretary General after the review. And part of that chapter dealt with the cost of discrimination. And I know
the cost of discrimination.
The cost of not realizing that goal. And there are places where women were not even allowed to have ID cards. Without an ID card, you couldn't go to the bank to ask for a loan. So you have a social arrangement where the woman is supposed to be a ward of a husband or of a older family member. But because of that, the woman cannot engage in economic activities, which would then improve the household economy, but also the economy of the country. I mean, it's like you are saying 50% of the people of your country shouldn't contribute.
So
who is the loser? So you have to show.
Right.
So we looked at women, we looked at young people, we looked at sexual minorities, we looked at
people with disabilities.
We looked at ethnic minorities, and there's a map of the world which shows how ethnic minorities are treated in several parts of the world. And, so we had a lot of opposition. Even on the issue of ethnic minorities, some countries, powerful countries, did not want the map to be reproduced in the report. It's like, but in the end, they wanted that whole chapter on human rights and dignity to be taken out. And interestingly, it cut across the whole world. The Americans had their own concern, the Africans had their concern, the Russians had. Everybody was upset.
But it's shocking that people want to leave out the fundamental, topic of human rights.
The officials advising the Secretary General on these issues said, look, you cannot expect the Secretary General to put his name to this report. In other words, they thought it was too controversial.
Too hot.
Too hot. So we had meetings every day. And then I think the member states were so upset that my executive director thought it was going to affect the organization. So he complained, And then because we had all these consultants and staff members who did the research work, one day they came to see me and they said, look, the report has so much. So if they want this out, why don't we just take it out?
Kind of try to compromise.
Yes. And I said to them, because they did most of the work, so I said, I had to show respect for their work. And I told them that we should all go and sleep over it. We'll meet the next day. So when we met the next day, I said to them, look, think about the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948. 1948. The world did not even know as much about these issues as we know today. And think about the people who pushed for the adoption of that declaration. Eleanor Roosevelt and all kinds of women from countries where they didn't even have equal rights. So I said, and it's interesting, when they started negotiating that document, I understand that the first sentence that that was proposed said all men are born equal and with
from the very beginning, eh?
From the beginning, right? So I think a lady from Costa Rica or so insisted that it should be all people, because what about women? But that document is so revolutionary, and it talks about everyone having the right to enjoy their human rights without distinction of any kind. Now, so if you apply that language, it means that nobody should have the right to say, well, you don't qualify to enjoy all the rights in our Constitution because there's something wrong with the way you enjoy your rights. So if at that time they had been courageous enough, at that time I think it was maybe 70-something years, how can we today be so scared to speak the truth about phenomena that is part of our social life? So let's do it this way. As long as the data and the evidence is valid, and the conclusions derived from that, we should keep it. We should insist on it. because they may make reservations to that chapter. They have the right to do that. But one day, they'll go back to the chapter and use it as a basis to advance the human rights agenda. So, and they were okay with it. And in the end, it survived, but it was quite difficult.
Yeah, but it's good to hear that it survived.
Yes, it did.
Especially given different corners of the globe and the issues that that they had.
Indeed,
with the various,
indeed.
That's wonderful.
Indeed, yes.
So just before we move to the next question I want to ask you, I just, have these conversations around discrimination, have you made any progress, since this report, and what's the situation today?
Yes, I wish I could say that we've made progress since then, but there has been backsliding. I think one of the challenges that we see is the fact that the discussions around these issues have become so toxic that emotions are actually what is driving most of the issues. But the emotions have a cost politically, unfortunately. So every political party, wherever we are looking at, is trying to ensure that they are on the side of their people. And the people are being manipulated by all kinds of groups and so on. And for me, one example which shows you how difficult the situation is the issue of intersex people. And the United Nations Human Rights Council, I think in April or so.
This year,
considered a resolution on the protection and promotion of the rights of intersex people. And unfortunately, many of the member states interpreted intersex as sexual orientation. And it's just, so it's almost like where you're so afraid of an issue that anything that you associate with it becomes part of the basket, even though they're just part of the acronym or whatever it is. But intersex is not about sexual orientation.
You're speaking on LGBTQI+.
LGBTQI, because these are people who are born with two sexual organs. And the consequences psychologically, in terms of discrimination, and also violence is so real. And in certain states where there's this onslaught against trans people, if somebody who has two organs were to go to the female toilet and they saw him, they would think that he's there to maybe rape women, but so which toilet is he supposed to use, that sort of thing. And even I think Ghana's parliament, when they were discussing the bill, essentially said that, okay, they are not covered, they are not part of the
intersex is not part of, okay.
And I think they had some provisions allowing them to have surgical processes to correct or remove or.
But what if they don't want to? If they're comfortable with?
I guess then. I mean, we don't have a law against them, right? So that is fine. But even they recognize that there's nothing wrong with them being accorded human rights, right? But then you have the Human Rights Council, and that was the issue, and they said, well, because of the opposition to LGBT around the world, we cannot. And so fortunately, this resolution passed, but barely. Right. Barely. I think it won by 1 vote. So it tells you that the world is divided. Even on an issue that is not threatening, to anybody, because it's not the fault of a human being that they have a biological abnormality or whatever, but why can't they be accorded human rights?
So I said I had one more question, but I think I just want to spend a minute more on that because, having spent time with you and listening to, different viewpoints you've shared, I know that for you, human rights are fundamental. People should respect everyone's basic and fundamental human rights. And, on this topic that we've just been discussing, we've heard that some people, there's polarization, and there is even a further polarization where some of the letters in the LGBTQI are accepted by some and some are rejected, so where intersex is not clear for people, they kind of say, okay, they should be accorded human rights, but the rest shouldn't. And I know, I believe it's something that you're against fundamentally because you've shared, your openness to all people, regardless of gender, of ethnicity, of sexual orientation. How do you, in your capacity or with the skills you have or with the sensitivities you've developed over the years, talking to people from different cultures and understandings, how do you, approach this sensitive topic? And how have you ever been able to help people to understand that the ways of thinking could be changed or shifted, if that makes sense as a question?
Yes. Well, so, and that's a good question. And it seems to me that the evidence is that young people, at least, are the least discriminating of people. And I noticed it when we went to Bali in 2010 or so. We organized
wonderful place,
beautiful place. Yes, we organized a global youth conference, and for the first time, because when you talk to young people, when they go for meetings at the UN, they complain that the meeting will say conference on youth and whatever,
and there are
but
no youth.
They will be there as like so marginal, whatever. It's the governments which are, in control, and yet they say they are doing it for the youth. So I turn it on its head, and we spent a lot of money, but we got money from the private sector and so on. We spent a lot of money in converting a whole conference room, huge conference room in Bali, into like a theater sitting, right? So for the first time in a UN conference, there was no podium, with the chairs and the officials,
looking
and then everybody else down there. No. So we said, look, everybody is equal here. Governments, young people, everybody is equal, right? So the ministers are seated there, the young people are seated in there, and we even made access to young people from around the world who could join
virtually.
There were people taking the questions and bringing them into the room, and then, so people could hear the answers that were being given. Absolutely. The idea was that the way we do things is so old-fashioned. So people come and they read their speeches and so on. There's no interaction, and you don't hear everybody, and who really listens to those long speeches, right? But this was great. So some young person criticized a minister from their country. The minister took the floor to respond, and then they found common ground in the meeting, So one of the ways that we can break down the silos and if you like, the feeling that people go into negotiations, into these meetings to win their position, right? And if we don't win, we are going home. Is to come up with methodologies which help to break down the differences, and so I have seen that work because I insisted on doing things that way, so young people are key. because they think differently. They see things differently.
We've covered some heavy issues, some serious issues, and some of them are covered in the book that you wrote, which is honestly a real manual for understanding negotiation, for understanding diplomacy. And if someone didn't know you, they won't understand the other side of you. So I'd like to get into that a little bit as well. I mean, apart from this book, you also write poetry. You've been around, you've worked, at least you've traveled to over 70 countries, if I'm not wrong, in the course of your work. How has that shaped the kind of diversity that you bring as a person?
Yes.
In your passions and your interests.
Indeed. So, you know, I actually started when I was in school. I wanted to write a novel, and I started writing a novel, and then I showed it to my English professor, who critiqued it so much that I put it aside. The poetry started in Prague, you know, of all places, and I was talking about Milan Kundera, the unbearable likeness of being, you know. It's like, so when I was posted to Prague, they had just moved from being a socialist state to a market economy. It's a beautiful place. You had expatriates from everywhere in the world, you know, especially the Americans and the Brits, you know, moving to Prague to teach English, to live, you know, was a very heady moment, you know. And we, the diplomatic community, were no different, you know. So you close from work and you drive straight to the city center, and you go and join friends at a table, and then, you know, you drink beers and you chat, and it was, and then of course, you know, they have the best opera and so on. So
wonderful opera
you know,
houses.
so the cultural legacy of the Bohemian period is just amazing. It actually inspired me, and I started writing poems for my friends. You know, it's like we would do something, and then I'll write something joking, you know. Then I started, I realized that, you know, Christmas cards were so inadequate in expressing what you wanted to say. And since we're no longer writing letters, because, you know, we now had emails and so on, I thought I would share a poem at the end of each year, you know. So I used to do it, and then I'll post it on Facebook for my friends, and then somebody said, you know, you should publish the whatever. So then I thought, okay, I'll do it. But talking about, I mean, I have a very, and to quote Kundera, I have a very light attitude to existence, you know. So it's like I'm always trying to understand the meaning of life, and the only answer I have is that you only find meaning in life if you can lead a meaningful life, right? Yeah. Because I don't see any, well, I don't find any answers anywhere.
In and of
yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I find that if you know yourself, then you will know what makes a meaningful life in your perspective. So,
I'm so glad I had this book on. You know, it's one of my favorite novels. It's philosophical, it's clever,
absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely.
So I've just discovered something we have in common.
We do.
Beyond the love of writing.
Absolutely. You know, absolutely. So part of the meaningfulness, I think, is when I feel that life has meaning. I'm happier if I'm able to help somebody, you know, if I'm, and to use the expression, love your neighbor. And that extends to, if I go to, and as you were saying, I think I've been to like 100 countries and spent time in many countries, you know, it's like, and so I go to the places where they go, I eat the food they eat, I go to the nightclubs they go to, I open myself to all cultures and lifestyles, and it makes me, I feel that it's worth it. It makes my period of existence meaningful. Because otherwise, you know, I think people tend to be, well, not people, a lot of people tend to be very serious and so on, and I you know, I don't know that helps.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a story. When we went to Bali for the concert, I managed to, with the help of a great friend of mine, get funding from people in San Francisco and you know, people linked to the arts and films and so on. And so we got millions of dollars to organize that conference. And so we organized a concert for the young people.
Nice.
And one of the singers was Avicii. Unfortunately, he committed suicide a year or so after. But I mean, I didn't know anything about Avicii, you know. So my colleagues were doing the organization and so on. The guy comes on his own plane. He didn't charge us for free, right? And then we have Timbaland, the producer. I did not know any of these people. So I was told that, you know, we should go to some room to greet the people who are going to perform. And I go and I see some people in scruffy jeans and so on, and then we shake hands, but nobody says, "Oh, this is Avicii, this is Timbaland." So whilst the concert was going on, and I was joining the young people and
getting down,
you know, so I took a picture and sent it to my daughter, and she said, "Oh, you have this person, you have that person." I said, "Who is that?" He said, "What's wrong with you? You don't know Avicii, you don't know Timbaland." So, but I wrote a poem about Avicii.
After he passed away.
I basically told him he should wake up, because he says we should wake him up after we have, in a sense, he thought we were destroying the world, right? And so we should wake him up after we
fixed it.
Something like that. So I told him he should wake up.
We're working on it.
Yeah. So I get a lot of satisfaction in playing with words, playing with ideas, and just enjoying everything that is out there. You know?
Making life meaningful for you.
Absolutely.
So if you were giving advice to your younger self, well, in fact, there are a lot of young people who aspire to have a fraction of the experiences you have. What would you advise them?
Yeah, that's a tough question. You know why? Because I don't know that one can give anybody advice. But I would say, I mean, I have a crazy story of my youth, and
feel free to share it. If you'd
so
like.
there was a time when I wanted to be like Christ, right?
Okay.
Because I guess I assumed that was the thing to be. But I'm no longer aiming to be like Christ. So that shows you
where you're coming from.
That's right. So I think that the advice really is that, look, you go through different stages in life, and but you should always read, because being knowledgeable can have dividends you cannot imagine. You know, one of the things that I think about a lot, and I'm not going to say this in public, but you know, when I was in high school, we watched a movie, called El Magentry.
Okay.
I don't know, it's quite a long time ago, but it was a classic at the time. But it was the story of a guy who was such a sweet talker. He went into a town and essentially took over the church members of the most profitable church in town. And so the other pastors got very very upset, and he said, "Okay, I'm going, I'm leaving," But then one of the ladies, he did a lot of harm
in the community.
Yeah. One of the ladies took him in and then started a church for him, and then he started. I mean, the way people exploit the emotions of others for personal gain. It's incredible, and since it's so widespread, I'm going to assume that one of the things that young people should do is to try and educate themselves, ask questions, and try to find answers, and not become, not
vulnerable to outside.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is that because of social media, it's so much easy these days for people wherever, whether it's in politics, in religion, for a smart, immoral, unprincipled person. I actually wrote a poem about one of those people, but I don't think it can be published until the person is in jail. But anyway, and this is happening in countries where we think that democracy is the most established. And when they do the surveys, the young people say, "Oh, that's the guy we want." So, you see what I mean? So obviously, you cannot educate yourself through TikTok, and you need to open yourself up to so
learn
many
things for yourself, know yourself, and derive your confidence and so on from yourself.
And make sure that you are honest with yourself, because the consequences can be dire.
So you mentioned, you made reference to a poem that you've written but not yet published. Would you do you remember some of your poems offhand? Would you like to leave one of them with us?
I don't.
Or would you like to make up a poem now on the spot?
I make up a poem now. Tucci. I usually do that, but yes.
But it's too early in the day, huh?
Yes, but I see the beauty outside, and I hope we feel it inside.
I certainly do. It's always wonderful chatting with you. Honestly, we can talk about so many topics, and I'm quite sure I'd love to invite you back. I mean, I'm hopeful that you will accept my invitation to come back again.
Always,
and we can explore some of those other areas.
Always.
Yeah.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much.